everyone. I'm very pleased to open this session of the Jewish Names Conference. I'm always happy to participate again in these sessions. My dear colleague and friend, Professor Dembski, has made this kind of life's project, and I'm very happy to be associated with it for so many years. In this session, we'll be talking about Jewish names in Poland and Germany, but I think it's also important to note we're talking about the modern period, the period of modernization of the Jews and of European society in general. Names seem to have a very important function, both as an indicator, an indication of modernization, acculturation, if you wish, and we also might ask, are the names also an engine of modernization and acculturation? I'm always reminded of the movie called Sunshine by the Hungarian director István Szabó, where the name change is almost a thing that moves the plot along, starting with Sonnenschein, change to Schorsch, and then at the very end, after all the tragic things that happen to the family, the fifth generation goes back to Sonnenschein, with a lot of lessons learned in between. Today's session, we're going to hear about different aspects of name changing, adoption of names, the process of Jews being, in a sense, obligated to take upon themselves names. And we have a series of interesting lectures from a group of important scholars. Our first speaker today will be Aleksandra Zurek. She's a graduate of the University of Warsaw. She's currently a PhD candidate preparing a dissertation on first names and surnames taken by converts from Judaism to Christianity in Warsaw. And her scholarly interests are in onomastics, especially anthroponymy. And she will speak, as we can see, on surnames of converts from Judaism to Christianity in Warsaw from 1826 to 1850. Please. Our speakers all have 20 minutes, leaving some time for questions, comments afterwards.
The phenomenon of conversion, as it is very complex, can be analyzed obviously for a number of perspectives: historical, sociological, psychological, linguistics. For example, I will talk about the onomastic point of view. I will answer some questions about the surnames of the converts from Judaism to Christianity in Warsaw in 1826 to 1850. The question I would like to answer are, first, did the converts change their surnames? If so, what kind of surnames were there, Polish or foreign? Third, were these surnames typical or different from the ones already existing in Polish anthroponymic system? Fourth, are the answers to these questions different for particular denominations? I would also like to talk a little about the number that we already have about the converts in the 19th century Warsaw. There are some books on that topic, but in my opinion, this number that we have are not fully reliable, and I will explain why. But before I get to that, I would like to give you just a general sketch on the situation of the Jewish community in Warsaw in this time. So you can understand better why some people even wanted to become Christians. So most of the members of Jewish society, community in Warsaw in these times were poor or even extremely poor. There were some job limitations. They couldn't choose a place to live completely freely. They had to pay special taxes. This is why conversion for many of them, for some of them, not many, some of them seemed as a beginning of a better life. Of course, people converted for a variety of reasons. I don't want to get into that now because this is a very complex question. In my opinion, for this time, in this place, the economic reason seems to be one of the most important. The process of conversion was not so easy and required certain preparations, but living after baptism was also complicated for converted Jews. The Jewish society treated the conversion as an act of betrayal, and they very often didn't want to have anything to do with their converted relatives. And on the other hand, the Christian society did not treat the converted Jews with the full trust. So Jews who converted were excluded from their old community and not fully included into the new one. This is why some of them choose to move to another city and start a new life with a new identity. And that's why they were changing surnames. This is, of course, one of the reasons. I have decided to begin my studies in the year 1826 because in this year a new law in the Kingdom of Poland was introduced. It was called the Civil Code of the Kingdom of Poland, and among others it contained a stipulation about parish baptism records. They were since then by law to serve also as secular legal records. So parish priests had to write the registries according to the fixed pattern, and moreover they had to write the books in 2 copies. One of the copy had to be delivered yearly to the state archive, and these books from this archive survived until today in the huge majority, which cannot be said about the books kept in parishes. What about the year 1850? In this year the changing surnames was banned for Jews because of some registry difficulties, for the clarity of records. There are some subjects, as I mentioned, there are some subjects on the topic of conversion of this time in Warsaw. One of them is a book by Teodor Jeske-Choiński called Neofici Polscy, Polish Neophytes. It was published in Warsaw in 1904, and in the books Jeske-Choiński gives a short history of Jewish converts in Poland, but most importantly he gives lists of people who converted in 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th century. The aim of this book, according to its author's words, was purely scholarly, but Teodor Jeske-Choiński is known as one of the most notorious anti-Semites of his times. And in his book he was deliberately inaccurate. He was ready not to include a name if properly remunerated. This fact is well known among scholars whose studies focus on this subject, the names of the converts in the 19th century Warsaw, but the scale of Jeske-Choiński's omissions had not yet been examined, since there is no other book, and since this is the book used for all of the studies I know about the converts in 19th century Warsaw, the matter of Jeske-Choiński's accuracy is particularly important. Jeske-Choiński worked on baptism records, and as I mentioned before, they are quite well preserved until today. So I analyzed the same records that Jeske-Choiński had claimed to analyze. And it turned out that in his research he didn't take into consideration some of the parishes at all. And on the other hand, he had access to some books that hadn't survived until today, so I couldn't access them. So in the comparison I am about to show you, I only show the results for the books potentially accessible for both of us. So a total number of converts in my study is 800, while in Jeske-Choiński's studies there is only 308. So the percentage of accuracy in his studies is only 39%. The numbers are different for particular denominations. In Protestant churches there is a 100% accuracy, while, for example, in St. Cross Church Jeske-Choiński found 153 converts, while there were 188 of them. That's 81% accuracy. But, for example, in the Church of the Visitation of the Holy Mary, he found only 2 converts, while there were 95 of them. That's only 2% accuracy. And on the other hand, in Jeske Choiński book shows there are some names that I couldn't find. So that's 46 people. So when I realized that, I double checked, of course, but the results were the same. And then I ran these names through the Polish Polish Geological Society database, but the names still didn't came up. So that led me to the conclusion that Jeske Choiński might have added some names to his lists. About the surnames. First question, did the converts change the surnames? It turns out that in the majority they did. 69% of all converts changed the surnames. In Catholic parishes, 79% of converts changed the surnames. In Protestant parishes, Calvinist and Lutheran, 20%, and in Orthodox parishes, again, more, 59%. Were they Polish surnames or foreign surnames? First, I need to explain what I mean by Polish and foreign surname. The criterion was the suffix. So when there was a surname made of foreign root word with Polish suffix, I have seen it as a Polish surname because it was for me a sign of the way of adapting the surname into the Polish anthroponymic system. Of course, when there was no suffix, I looked only at the root word. So it turns out that most of the converts changed their foreign surname to Polish surname. 37% of all actions taken by the converts. Most of them were complete changes, and by complete changes I mean that the new name, new surname had nothing to do with the old one. That's 90% of this group, of this 37%. Some of them were translated surnames, like when someone was called Rosenblum, after baptism he could be called Różański. So Róża, it's the same word, but it's only 5% of all changes here. And there were some morphological adaptations. Usually they were with the ski suffix. The ski suffix was seen, and still is sometimes, as a noble one, the better one, the ones that was used by the nobles. The second group was changing the Polish surnames to Polish surnames, and again, most of them were complete changes when the new surname had nothing to do with the old one. There were also some morphological adaptation, again with the ski suffix usually. Some people, 21% of the people, didn't change their foreign names, and probably there will be no surprise when I see that most of these people were from Protestant churches, so German, let's say, in simplification, of course. Some people didn't change their Polish surnames, 10% of them. Some of them changed foreign to foreign surnames. Again, there were usually complete changes, and some of them Polish to foreign. Were converts' surnames exceptional in Polish anthroponymic system? It is believed that surnames typical for converts in Poland are those surnames associated with Christianity, for example, Krzyżanowski. Surnames associated with conversion and its voluntary character, this is very important, such as Konwerski or Dobrowolski. Surnames derived from the names of the days of the weeks, such as Niedzielski, and surnames derived from names of the months, such as Paździerski. It turns out that in my material these surnames were not so common. Surnames associated with Christianity, it was only 1% of the surnames. Surnames associated with conversion, only 2%. Surnames derived from the names of the days of the week, 0.5%, and surnames derived from names of the months, 13%. So here the number is bigger in the months section, but it can be not necessarily because these names were more typical than others. There was a lot of names like Majewski, from May, or Kwieciński from Kwiecień, which is April, and these surnames are popular also among Christians, Poles. So this doesn't mean that this was much more popular. I would like to underline here that even though these surnames seems to be connected with conversion and seems to be typical for converts, it doesn't mean that when you meet someone with one of these names, it doesn't mean that he is a convert or descendant of the convert. There were a lot of things happening with Polish surnames during the history. So, for example, Krzyżanowski could be someone who lived close to the krzyż, to the cross that was in some village, or someone who was a sculptor and made cross. So it doesn't mean that these people are of Jewish origin. So most of the surnames taken by the Christians, the converts from Judaism to Christianity was typical for Polish anthroponymic system. They appear now, they appeared in the history, they appeared also in the analyzed period. So I'm getting to the conclusion now, and I would like to show you some references in the meantime. These are the most important, and I've tried to choose the ones that are in English, but of course they are not all. So in my presentation, I have shown you two things. First were the inaccuracies of Jeske Choiński's publication. Again, since this is the only book used for talking about converts in 19th century Warsaw, it is important that we know that the number that he gives is not really true, at least for the analyzed period. I haven't analyzed the other periods that he analyzed. So the number is not really reliable, and we should re-examine this number. Second thing I talked about were surnames taken by the converts, and the most important conclusion here is, as I said, that the converts from Judaism to Christianity could not have been in the majority recognized as former Jews only by the surnames, since there were, and unfortunately still is, a number of people who think that it is, according to their words, to expose a hidden Jew only by looking at the surname. This is a socially important question. Thank you.
Why don't you stay here? Let's see.
Sure.
We have time for questions now. Any questions, comments? Well, I have one. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Please, Alex.
You had that in 1850 there was a law prohibiting Jews from changing, only Jews?
Yes.
Because specifically?
It was specifically for the Jews. Yes, that's strange, but that's what happened. Yes.
Strange? No, it's important to know.
No, but what were the motivations for this law? To prevent this, what you've been talking about?
I guess so, yes. It was the general situation in the Russian Empire, because Poland in this time was the part of the Russian Empire, to pretend, to stop the Jews from changing their surnames, yes.
Yeah, I knew about Russia, but I didn't know specifically for...
Yeah, we had the same king with the Russians, so...
Thank you.
Any more? No, I have one.
Mm-hmm.
You had the numbers. I mean, people have been talking about the business about Jeske Choiński, that, you know, he faked, and also people could buy him off. I mean, this is known. But among the names you just gave examples of the names, but how many examples do you have of several people taking this name, where it's all single people taking one name?
Of this typical for converts?
Yes.
I had the numbers somewhere, but I don't know, not here. I remember that these surnames derived from the names of the months were like 20-something people in general.
Okay. And the records, these are baptismal records?
Yes.
And you just went through the books from the parishes?
Yes.
So a few hundred people, but in that period of 1826 to 1850, there must have been thousands.
100,015, more or less.
And you did this by hand? Just going?
They are online, so I just clicked on my computer. But yes,
Okay.
yes.
But you can't search text?
No.
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 A lot of energy. Commend you for your energy. Any other questions, comments? Yes,
I
please.
just want to know, have you looked at all at their first names? Did they also change first names?
Yes, they did. There was no time for discussing this today. They did change their surnames, their first names into Catholic first name, obviously. If they left a surname without, a first name without any change, it was like Adam or something like that. That could be both Jewish and Christian.
Anyone else? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aleksandra. And let us go on then. Our second speaker today is Witold Wrzosinski, and he holds an MA in Hebrew Studies from the Warsaw University, and he runs Avanim, a Polish Jewish genealogy research service, as well as the Foundation for Documentation of Jewish Cemeteries. I've come across your name in connection to that, various news stories and things like that. I particularly like that story you wrote about what's going on in Vilnius with the Jewish cemetery and real estate projects. It was kind of sad, but it was very interesting. He's speaking today about the...
Is Vilnius still in Poland?
No, it's in Lithuania. That's why I called it Vilnius and not Vilno or Vilna. So it's in Lithuania, very much so. He's speaking today on Hebrew family names on epitaphs in the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery. Please.
Okay, so I'm here to speak about the Hebrew surnames at the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw. Printed out. There was a 4-year project that took place in Warsaw a few years ago that I participated in, which consisted in indexing all the matzevot that are there, because all the whole documentation of the cemetery was burned during the war, so there was no list of people buried there. So we had to do it by hand, just walking from matzeva to matzeva and writing down what we saw. And we created a database that was put online and then continued with other cemeteries. In Warsaw, we have found over 80,000 legible inscriptions that we transcribed and put online with photographs. So all the photographs that I will show you come from this database. At first, we were quite naive, and we decided we had many big ideas. One of them was to try and find the root of every surname and try to transcribe it according to the rules of the original language. The idea behind it was that every surname has some meaning or some sense. Turned out to be naive, as I said. Anyway, we have found many Hebrew surnames, which surprised us because, as it has already been said, and most of us already know, that the surnames of Polish Jews were mostly given by Prussian and Austrian clerks, representative of administration, because of edicts and laws that were introduced at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, for Galicia, for the part of the world that later became known as Galicia, and the Kingdom of Poland, and the Pale of Settlement. Again, that's a later name. So the parts that became later the Pale of Settlement were under the rule of the Russians, which means the administration there would usually assign surnames that sounded Slavic, Russian or Polish. The same way Prussian and Austrian clerks, Austro-Hungarian clerks, would give surnames, would assign surnames that sound German. The purpose was noble. These were the times of Napoleon, and and those surnames were supposed to help Jewish citizens to become equal citizens with everybody else, to enable them to assimilate, just take part in the general culture as equal citizens. And we don't have exact, we actually have no documents from those times, from those commissions that assigned surnames. Almost no testimonies from people who worked in those commissions or who went there and received their surnames. We only have those edicts that were issued by kings and emperors, where it says clearly the rules are mentioned. The rules that every family should receive a different surname, every family should receive a German surname in this case, and that they shouldn't be surnames of established noble families, and so on and so on. That is why we found it quite interesting to see quite many Hebrew surnames, or surnames coming from Hebrew. And I've collected some of them and just decided to present them as a kind of a preliminary case study. And I've taken the liberty to divide them in a few groups to make it easier. Because some of them we can expect, others much less. Those that we can expect are, okay, I will start with the pictures, are the ones that are older than the process of assigning surnames, that were there before and were already used, like Levi or Levi. So we can see it here spelled in Polish, and here, interestingly, spelled in Yiddish, with an ein, and this was the case of many Hebrew surnames, that the spelling was purportedly in Yiddish, so that it's clear that it's a surname, because surnames were usually spelled in Yiddish while the rest of the inscription is in Hebrew. So that no one makes a mistake and thinks that it's the second given name of the father, Tzvi Levi, for example. This would make it clear that it was a surname. And of course, Kohen, HaKohen. The same case here. You can see the spelling is very Yiddish. You can see it here.
Yes, but the both that is a Kohen in Hebrew.
Yeah, because that's the part of the traditional name, and that's the new surname. We don't really know what those commissions looked like. If they asked people if they already have a surname, if they have an idea for a surname, or if they just assigned. Probably, most probably, it was different from place to place. In some localities, they just took a book of birds and gave every family a name of a bird or a tree. In others, they might have asked. We have indirect proof in some of the surnames. There are two that indicate that those people were asked by the commission if they already had a surname, and they didn't know German. They answered in Polish, and the clerks thought that this was a surname. There are two answers that we have in our database. One family was called bez nazwiska, which means I don't have a surname. And the other family was called nie wiem, which means in Polish I don't know. So this is circumstantial proof that some people were asked if they already had a surname. But let's go back to Hebrew ones. Of course, Margaliot. Here you see it, spelled in a very nice Hebrew way. This is a very old rabbinical lineage that was present much longer, much sooner than the clerks who came to assign surnames. Then, of course, again, a rabbinical lineage, Yafeh, here. And another known one, which was Teomim. Here you can see Teomim. And one last one from those old surnames is again a very classic one. Here you can see it spelled here in Polish Ashkenaz, and here Ashkenaz. So this is understandable. People came and said, we already have a surname. We come from an old family that has always used a surname, and it's so and so. And some clerks evidently accepted it. But then we go to the second group, which is a bit more surprising, but still, these were universally known words in the Jewish community. So one didn't have to know Hebrew well to know those words, and as they belong to everyday Jewish culture. But still, it's Hebrew, and you can see. Well, you cannot see actually, but here it says Tisha B'Av. I don't know if you can see it at all. That's a surname that was pronounced Tisha B'Av, because this is how you would read it in Yiddish, Tisha B'Av. But Tisha B'Av. But it was a clever way to smuggle something very Jewish, very Hebrew, Tisha B'Av. Another one, well, I will go quick through these ones because they are self-understandable. Talmud. Okay. Chazan, spelled in Hebrew. Hasid, here. What else we have? Well, obviously, there's Melamed, but in here you see it spelled in Hebrew, but there's also another case where it's spelled in Yiddish, Melamed.
What year was that one from? Can you go back?
That one was 1941. That's the typical tombstone from 1941, made of cement. Yeah, they are specific. Continue. This is Sofer as a surname from Likeve, which is Wukov, but that's another story. This is, as you can see in Polish, it says Soicher. Here below, you almost can see Socher. Otherwise, there is surname is here, Gemara, which is a very nice surname. And there is even Mishnah too, not only Gemara but also Mishnah, but spelled with an ein at the end, Mishnah. Still, there is no other explanation for this surname then. Kaddish, in Polish Kaddish, and well, I could say, I could continue this but these were not purely, well, one is very suitable for today, for this place, Yerushalayim. That's a very nice surname anyway. I won't show you others, but there is a Parnes, there is Shabbaton, Pesachim, Kadushin, Yeshurim, and Purim. But these hardly classify as Hebrew surnames because people were using this every day, even speaking Yiddish. So let's go to the next group, which is abbreviated surnames. The surnames which look. This is Maze. This was pronounced Maze, but it's a code name for Mezera Aharon HaKohen. You know everything. I have nothing to tell you now. No, I have a few that might surprise you. Again, this is Babad Ben Av Beit Din. or son of a rabbinical, the head of the rabbinical court, and from the same idea, this was pronounced Bagaon, but it's, as you can see, Ben Ha-Gaon, son or descendant of a genius. We might guess that it's about the Vilnius Gaon, but we don't know, some Gaon. With time there was more and more of them everywhere. An interesting abbreviation is this one. Here you see it, Harlap, and you can see it's an abbreviation because even the P at the end is not a P suffix. And there are several explanations for this abbreviation. There's even a theory that they came from a Spanish Jewish family, Ibn Yahya, later called Don Yahya, and then when they went east after the Inquisition, the head of the family, his name was Chia, and supposedly this is short for Chia Rosh Le Galut Polin. There are also other explanations, not more convincing, not less convincing. It's clear that it was an abbreviation for something, and for many families it was a sign of something noble and Hebrew, which is important for us. Bagaon. Well, Katz and Segal, I don't think I have to show pictures. This is clear that these were important abbreviations of Hebrew words. There were also some individual cases like Braz, which was short for Ben Alexander Ziskind. This was Menachem Mendel Braz, Ben Alexander Ziskind. So Braz was an abbreviation of his actual situation. And there are more of those abbreviations, a lot of them, some of them completely obscure. But when we're talking about obscure, there were some names that appear just once in the Tanakh or in some other source. And in many cases, some cases that we found, they were used as a surname for no obvious reason. For example, Wowsi. I researched the name for a long time and turned out that it appears once in the Tanakh, and we don't really know almost anything about Wowsi. But someone decided to use a surname like this. The same is with Korach. There is a Lapidot, here spelled with an R, with Ein, and below in Russian, Lapides. Again, a name that appears just once in sources. There is a Nagdimon, which is Hebrew for a name otherwise known as Nicodem. There is Yabetz, a bit more known, and and we have, of course, Barraban. Well, there's just one resh, but there is no other explanation for this surname, and also below you can see it in Polish, Barraban. So that's a big part of it, and now my favorite part, strange compounds. This is one of them. Because I don't live with Jewish culture on an everyday basis, it took me some time to connect the dots. This in Polish you would pronounce Assorodobraj, which sounds strange in Polish, generally sounds strange, but it's just Asara Dibraja, made into a surname. So quite a basic thing, although the pronunciation was made it difficult. Another one, and this is a tentative explanation. I will be happy if you present a better one. This is just mine, and I'm not sure if it's. So you see the surname Haradramo or Haradrama, In Polish sources, this appeared as Haradramo. My idea was, Resh Mem Aleph, this is Remu, the famous Iserles from Krakow, the rabbi who wrote the Mapa, the comment on Shulchan Aruch. So this would be, I don't know, Harad Remu, something like this. That's my, as I said, tentative. That's a theory. But
how is it spelled in Latin or in Latin?
no, not on. There was no Latin spelling on any tombstone with this surname. But in Polish documents, I don't know, phone books or something like this, it was spelled Haradramo with an CH and as one word. So it could be Haradremu. I don't know, a follower of the. Yes, also. This is someone who wanted to sound almost like Bonaparte, Bonapores. You see it here below, Bonapores. Actually, in Hebrew, it's much more familiar. Ben Porat. So Ben Porat became Bonapores. Another one that also took some time to get right was. Before I found, here it is. It's not very well. No, you cannot see anything. Well, this in Polish it said kawenoka, but in Hebrew it says kawenaki, which is straight from the Talmud. But first we found one only with the Polish inscription, and it took us half a year to find another one, this one, which also had Hebrew, and finally that was solved because I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking kawenoka, what's that about? Turns out it was Hebrew originally. This one was simpler. This is. Can you see anything? No, you cannot. This is Kof, Aleph. Well, anyway, this is in Polish that's pronounced konciper. This comes from kancipor. Kancipor became konciper. So again, a Hebrew, clearly a Hebrew root, and Maskileison. That's a more known case. Maskileison sounds like Yiddish, like descendants of Maskilim, Maskileison, but it's just an Ashkenazi pronunciation. In reality, it's Maskil Leitan. So one of the names of the author of the Psalms, and also a famous scholar from Kiev from the beginning of the 19th century, who took the title of his book as his surname, and all his descendants became known as Maskileison. There are some nice ones. This one I already showed you, but I showed you Margaliot, and the surname below is Leftov with the line. So and it was a surname of two families in Warsaw, Leftov. And also Yomtov. It's fine. It sounds Russian, so I guess this is why it could have been registered. Yomtov, Lemtov, Yomtov, Leftov. It's almost sounds Russian. And one more of those is Benzev, which is Ben Zeev, but just spelled in a phonetical way. I'm sorry for the branches, but the cemetery is a jungle. And this brings us to the end of the list of surnames that could have been explained as simply could have been explained, because all the others are just straight out Hebrew words that most people back then probably had no opportunity to hear or say on everyday basis. So the question is, why would they choose that word? Where would they know it from? Like Ephron, spelled in Yiddish again, which is a nightingale. There is a dut, a testimony. Also, we have it in Polish pronunciation, eidus. We have evrach, again, a word that wouldn't be used. Avrech. Okay, I'm sorry. Geffen, but that was a big surname generally. But you can see it's spelled in Hebrew. People knew that it's a Hebrew word. These are interesting. Again, sorry for the vegetation. This is Igdal, Solomon Igdal, and it's written in Hebrew. There is no Aleph or Ayin there. This is the right spelling of Igdal, and the same with Ismach. Again, Yismach. This is again a very proper spelling in Hebrew. Someone chose it as a surname. It's a very nice surname, but what was the knowledge behind it? This is Yashpe, which is a jasper, a stone, a gem. A gemstone. Again, a word that wasn't that much used. Oh, that's a nice one. This is Polish syntax, but it's Meshorer as a surname. Meshorer was also not a word used on everyday basis. And even simpler words like here, Shachor, again spelled in a Hebrew way. Sorry, just a second. Oh, here, Katan. We have, there's just a few more. There's one that is quite known, which is Efrati. In this case, in Polish, it's Eprusi. Usually it was Efrusi, but the root is clearly Hebrew, Efrati. There is also Malach, spelled in a not really proper way, but that's what it is. And two more. One is difficult to explain. In Polish it says Nishmas. In Hebrew it's Nishmat. So there should be something after but it's a smichut, but without the second part. But still it's Hebrew. And the last one, a very basic one, is Ish, Chavole Ish. And in Polish also Ish, which is a man, a human. This is not a whole list, but it shows you that there has been quite a lot of Hebrew in use as far as surnames go, and we might ask, and maybe hope for an answer at some point, how did it happen? How did the administration agree to that? Because this was against the edict. These are surnames that actually make it harder for Jewish families to become inconspicuous, to not stick out, to assimilate with the surrounding culture. These are surnames that sound strange in German, sound strange in Polish. Well, maybe not strange, but foreign. These are surnames that make people who bear them seem foreign at the moment when they say their name. So, if that was against the law, the families who chose those surnames must have really wanted to have surnames like that, must have fought for it, bribed the clerks or convinced them in some way. We don't know, but they must have really cared about a surname that makes them different from the surrounding culture. So we might assume, we might guess, because there's no chance that a representative of the administration would invent a name like that and give it to a family. So we might guess or assume that those surnames were a kind of a Jewish resistance against assimilation, against forced assimilation. Because, as you said before, surnames were an engine of acculturation and modernity. We might look at this as well, not this, but what I showed before as resistance against it, or, to use nicer words, a token of national or cultural pride that that some of the people were afraid they would lose if they took a surname that sounded foreign to them, a surname that comes from a culture that they perceive as foreign. And that's just a hypothesis, and I'm hoping that at some point we will have more sources to study this deeper and find answers and not only pose questions. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to.
Okay, 2 minutes for questions. We'll start with you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very interesting talk and so many questions and remarks.
So many, okay.
Myself. But first of all, let me add, we don't have only the addict, so when you say it's against the law, it's a little bit more complicated because this is what I do in my research,
Okay.
and I hope I will give some answers in my talk. But for example, the Edict of 1797, which
Yes.
was implemented by Prussia, also for Warsaw,
Yeah.
didn't mention anything with German names, for example, just fixed names. So
Okay.
what I also will tell you in some minutes, for many officials, the kind of names were not so important.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, I will talk about that in a
Okay.
few minutes. Some ideas about some of the names you mentioned, for example, the Charlap, or names beginning with a chet. From my experience, often they are connected to an acronym beginning with Chatan.
Mm-hmm.
So
Chatan
the
Reb
son-in-law
Pinchas Leib. Yeah,
of
that's
someone. So this is what I know from sources from the 18th century, where I'm always sure that means son-in-law of somebody. So,
yeah.
and Yerushalayim, I mean, it could be also a false friend because you know that the suburb of what's it called in Polish, Wrzosinski, or
Yes, but this lasted for 2 years only.
Mhm.
This suburb, and then it was so. And there are too many people called Yerushalayim at the cemetery. So, but you're right. There was a suburb called Nova Jerozolima from, I think, 1764 or 84 to 86 for 2 years generally, and we still have the main street in Warsaw is called after that Alei Jerozolimskie, but it was just 2 years. So, but yeah, it could be.
And one question, you showed beautifully that when names, the Hebrew names and Polish versions appear on one stone, that it's
Mm-hmm.
that's connected. But did you double check all the names, like all the Matzabot, where you only had the Hebrew names? Did you check if in real life, in legal life, the name was connected to that or not? Like Malgorzata, for example, I could imagine that maybe the legal name was also Pearl or something, or was it always connected to the Hebrew name?
Luckily, I enjoy double checking and triple checking, so that was what I was doing all the time, and Margaliot was usually in Polish documents simply Margulies or Margulis, but it was there was a family, you're right, which used double surname Margaliot Perła, but they always use both. To differentiate themselves from the other Margaliots, who I guess were inferior because they were not, they just had one surname, or I don't know. But anyway, yes, I spent as many time as was possible within the project to double check and triple check every surname in every source that I could lay my hands on, and it was a lot of fun.
Please.
First of all, thank you very much for the fascinating approach which you have adopted. I have one suggestion and a few questions. Lapidus,
Yes.
I think it's Lithuanian, a Jewish Lapidus name,
Mhm.
but this is...
No, it's But does it mean anything in Lithuania?
I don't know, but quite a known Jewish name.
I know, it was a big family, but I'm guessing it's
Shachor Katan, maybe it was translation from Schwarz and Klein.
probably.
Maybe. What I would do, I hope you did it, if not, it's still time, to check the death certificate.
Oh, sure, yes.
Whether there's, because I'm not sure that the administration officials went to the cemeteries trying to check what is written on the matzeva. So we
no,
really,
obviously they didn't.
if I would have the time, I would check, try to find out the death certificate to see what is done. You have the date when the person died, so it's not too difficult to correlate it and to see what's there, but it's fascinating, and I would love to borrow from you the database.
Anybody else? Please.
I'm looking at the photographs that you showed us. I think that they could also learn like a lot of some history from all these things, from the two studies, because the ones that I think there was a Balaban then, I think Lapidot is also from Sephardi origin, so it's probably some of those people who came from Gershon to Poland. That's what I'm saying is that that not only are the names of interest, but also looking at it from a historical perspective.
Sure, Warsaw is interesting because the cemetery was founded in 1806, and this is also more or less when Warsaw became a very attractive capital city that people started coming to from practically all over Eastern Europe, including Jews. So the set of surnames in the cemetery is very rich because these are surnames from all over. And as you say, some do. You know, we have Barbanels in the cemetery, which is which was a known Sephardic family that had some branches going east. We have families called Portugal. The truth is that we also have those that are called Jamaica or Ceylon, and I wouldn't think that those families came from there, but still Portugal is, it suggests something. And obviously there's a lot of people called Ish-Horowitz, including in my family, and the Horowitz, the family from Horowice supposedly came from Spain or Portugal too. So it is a very, yes, I'm coming. It could be a very, or I hope it already is, a very useful tool for historians studying Polish Jewish history, Warsaw history, Polish history. The database is online, so it's available to everyone.
David?
It's a related question. What is the state of the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw? Is
Le-
concerned that it's getting overgrown?
Yeah, it already got overgrown a long time ago. It's been neglected for 50 years. Well, it was neglected for 50 years after the war. Now there is management, there is a re-established Jewish community. The wall is surrounding the whole cemetery without any holes anymore. And it's been like that for 20 years now, almost. But still, the jungle inside is something that nothing can be done with, because, as you know, halacha, prohibits from cutting down trees and selling them. You have to be very careful because I'll try to. There are very strict rules, and the cemetery belongs to the Orthodox Jewish community of Warsaw. One of the rules is that if you take out plants, the roots can be intertwined with the bones, so then the remains cannot rest in peace until Moshiach comes. So it makes it hard to do practically anything. And if you cut down a tree and you do anything with it, the income that you have from it has to go exactly to this grave where the tree was growing, and the trees are now growing everywhere. As I said, it's a jungle. So the thing that the management is doing is just trying to maintain it as it is, so that it doesn't get worse. And they're not they're doing not bad. It's they're doing whatever they can. Let me just say that there are other cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries in Poland, which are in a much worse state and under no management, no control, no supervision. So this one is still in a very good position.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And as we heard already a little bit, that we may get some answers to some of our questions that were posed in this talk. Our third speaker is Johannes Czakai from the Free University of Berlin. He's a PhD candidate, and he's writing his thesis on the adoption of permanent names. I think that's an important distinction. Not family names, but permanent names. Part of it is, I guess, is part of also just bureaucracy, trying to keep track of people. And, all these Jews, they all look alike, and they're all of them called Reuven ben Shimon, Shimon ben Reuven. It's very confusing. So I guess I can understand the bureaucrat's dilemma here. But he's writing on the thesis on the adoption of permanent names by the Jews in Austria and Galicia, and it's his second time at the International Conference on Jewish Names, so we welcome him to address us now. And his topic is Jewish reactions to the adoption of permanent surnames in German lands, 1787 to 1849. Please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Today I will drink something, because the last time I had a very dry mouth. It's really complicated with all the English text I present today. So, in the era of emancipation, most German-speaking states commanded the Jewish inhabitants to adopt permanent surnames. In 1787, the Habsburg monarchy was the first state which implemented a name law for Jews, although I could prove 2 years ago here at this conference that Galician Jews adopted permanent names as early as 1785, 2 years before. Accordingly, in the following decades, most states implemented similar laws, and tens of thousands of surnames were registered in German lands between 1787 and 1849. Historiography, however, has valued this means quite differently. It is perceived as a necessary step towards emancipation or in suppression of cultural identity. But despite the common depiction of Jews being passive and complaining about governmental force, very little is known about the actual perspective of contemporary Jewry, the first generation that lived with these names. In my paper today, I will provide a small glimpse into these reactions, which I could find in archival material, predominantly from Prussia, as well as in newspapers and in memoirs. I will show that the required adoption of permanent surnames was not simply suppressive, but multidimensional. I give you my outline. First I start with positive reactions, then I go on with religious concerns, aspects of resistance, and then I come to my conclusion. The name laws in German-speaking lands were quite different from each other, but basically had the same purpose. Modern statehood required a legible population, and the anachronistic Jewish naming pattern sabotaged this effort. Just to give you an idea, this is Germany in the time of Napoleonic occupation. So you see also the whole west of Germany is occupied by France, so they had French law, and it's chaotic, the situation of laws. Oh yeah, and here I have a list of all the name laws that were implemented in German lands. I compared all these laws and their requirements, and surprisingly, the vast majority did not contain any restrictions. In countries like the French-occupied territories, place names and biblical names were forbidden, but most laws were quite liberal in the sense that Jews, at least in theory, were free to choose their new family names. This basic attitude is vividly expressed by the administration of the Prussian province of Posen. And I quote, "The kind of adopted family names is of less relevance to state interests than the act of name adoption in itself." Let me drink. Moreover, in some cases, Jewish naming laws were respected or even included in the legal process. In contrast to the common depiction, these name laws were not negatively perceived by contemporary Jewry, but sometimes even cheered. In 1811 and 1820, Simon van Geldern, which is the uncle of Heinrich Heine, by the way, supports this means fervently and summarizes his objections. Indeed, a very wise and appropriate regulation to turn Israelites into useful and good citizens. And he criticizes the ignorance of his co-religionists. I quote, "Many may have considered the adoption of proper first and family names as not very significant, but it seems to me that this is inevitable in their progress within civilization." This assessment corresponds with the thesis that Prussian officials regarded the adoption of permanent names as compulsory for emancipation, especially as psychological emancipation of the Jewish individual. But van Geldern also clearly highlights the practical necessity of such an administrational means. I quote, "Because the Code Napoleon, which was enacted in Western Germany, enacts that first and family names have to be recorded in every document regarding civil status. But how can this happen from individuals who do not have a family name at all? Only with a permanent name, Jews are able to become part of the modern public world and enjoy the benefits of their civil rights." Moreover, van Geldern criticizes his fellow Jews as passive and lacking in enthusiasm. I quote, "One could have expected from all other Israelites in Germany, even where no such regulation was implemented, that they would have felt moved of their own accord to suppress this bad habit. But contrary to this complaint, we can see in different cases that Jews themselves were the driving force, or were at least involved in the legal process. When in 1808 the Kingdom of Westphalia prepared an emancipation law, a Jewish consistory was asked to assist the elaboration. This consistory expressed the, quote, great benefit of the adoption of permanent family names. Period. In other countries, where the implementation of emancipation laws took a long time, Jews themselves began to adopt permanent names without any state legislation. Cases are known from the towns Unna and Gütersloh, as well as several communities in Württemberg. An interesting case is the free city of Hamburg. In 1848, Hamburg was one of the few places in Germany without emancipation laws as well as regulations concerning Jewish names. Surprisingly, two community officials, May and Harbleicher, wrote to the community board demanding the adoption of permanent family names. I quote, "The disorder of Jewish family names has been regarded as a huge annoyance since the Jews of Germany began to take part in civic order, and for more than 40 years laws have been implemented, but in other German states. Their letter was written in the time of updraft and self-consciousness of the Jewish community. Therefore, they did not want to wait until Christian politicians implemented such a law, because, in their words, we Jews are the ones who feel this disadvantage the most." They highlight the economic importance of the name and criticize harmful arbitrariness and disorder regarding the lack of governmental regulation. Their argumentation is an expression of a politically self-conscious and economically successful Jewish middle and upper class on its way towards the bourgeoisie. The family name is a social category which is necessary to enter civic sphere as well as economic life. Moreover, it serves as a boundary towards the poor, which seem unfit for the civic life of the middle class. Of course, even without name regulations, Jews in cities like Hamburg had adopted permanent family names long before. Also, May and Harbleicher had been born, and I checked their birth certificates, with a family name in a time around 1800 when Jews adopted such names deliberately and without state force. Their individual motivation is hard to reconstruct. We have to assume that it was foremost an act of habituation, but also of a symbolic assimilation. Sometimes we have more information. The Maskil Salomon Maimon allegedly chose his name in adoration for Moses Maimonides, although he does not mention his motives in his famous memoirs. Another Berlin Jew, writer and socialite Rahel Levin, as well as her family, adopted the name Robert long before state regulations. In a letter, she writes that her brother, Meyer as well, has adopted the name Heinrich Robert and writes, "It will pass." Her niece Johanna proudly admits, "You are quite right, I am also a Robert," while Rahel wishes her nephew Ferdinand he could, quote, "become a Robert in a short amount of time." So the adoption of a new name serves as a programmatic projection, promising a new identity and a better future. This short notice here in this quote regarding the brother also shows that name changes in this time could be very informal. It will pass. But also, during the time of the name laws, Jews found creative ways of demonstrating their will to assimilate into majority society. In 1809, the dentist Kalman Jakob of Hildesheim declares in an advertisement, quote, "According to royal Westphalian laws, I am obliged to adopt my family name for me and my descendants. Considering that my eager endeavor is to ease the pain of my fellow humans, I adopted the name Linderer," which means easer of pain. On his quest for an appropriate name which highlights his affinity towards German history, Samuel Emanuel from Bayreuth asked his Christian friend, the poet Jean-Paul, and the latter consulted the latest literature and recommended names with strong Germanic roots. He proposed Ewald, Odo, Friedanot, and some others. Samuel finally chose the name Osmund. So, despite the common notion that Jews were obliged to adopt German-sounding surnames, we find such requirements in the edicts only in 4 German states. That is, Frankfurt, Hessen-Darmstadt, Lippe-Detmold, and Sachsen-Meiningen, all between 1808 and 1811. So, when we speak of a Germanization of names, we can detect that in most countries, Jews themselves were the driving force behind that. And I exclude Austria here, which is way more complicated and another topic. But of course, the reality of the statement is a little bit more complex. Although, according to the law, Jews were free in their choice, we have to observe that by adopting a German-sounding surname, assimilated Jews could hide their Jewish origin. In this light, the free choice seems not so free anymore, but reminds us of the ever-present anti-Jewish pressure from the majority society. We find this pressure on naming already in early modern times when Jewish converts had to adopt a Christian name. In order to highlight their symbolical resurrection in the new faith, they choose, or sometimes were given, pious and excessively Christian names, like Krzyżanowski, what you mentioned. Gottfried Selig lamented this practice. He's a convert himself. Therefore, we find many Frommänner, Christfreunde, Sonnenfelse, Redliche, and Selige. But since among men always more evil than good can be found, in this perspective such a pious habit causes more harm than good, and one will hear that similar names gave very often occasion for the largest fraud. And he continues, I often regretted that next to my new name, Selig, which means blessed, I could not keep my original surname after baptism, because this otherwise very good name, Selig, became quite unpleasant and unfortunate after a while. But in contrast to this escape from names, or Namensflucht, as Dietz Behring calls it, we also see a great amount of people who stuck with their traditional patronymics, which were biblical, or also biblical first names like Abraham or Moses, and which highlights the importance of religious tradition. This leads to my next question. What can we say about religious concerns that we read about in the literature? Aaron Wolfson, land rabbi of Hildesheim, who assisted the authorities in their draft of a name law in the Kingdom of Hanover, summarized his religious attitudes as follows. On behalf of the Jewish religion, there is no reason for concerns against the adoption of permanent family names, since Bible and Talmud reveal that Jews have borne permanent family names in ancient times. With the exception of Westphalia, name laws did not interfere with religious commandments. But of course, it could interfere with traditional customs. Moshe Sofer, or Hachatam Sofer, rabbi in Bratislava and leading figure of the Orthodoxy, rejected every kind of modernization when he stated in his testament, "Beware of the change of the name, a foreign language, and a foreign clothing, God forbid." In practice, Jews could circumvent this problem by choosing names that reflected biblical stories or autobiographical episodes, as we see vividly in the memoirs of Moses Wasserzug from Posen. He mentions 2 reasons for the adoption of his new family name. First, as a child he fell into the water, but was rescued with God's help, and Wasserzug is German for pulled out of water. Second, the traditional derivation of his first name Moses or Moshe is traditionally because I drew him out of the water. And I quote, It happened on a certain day that the king of Prussia commanded that everyone from Israel had to choose a name additional to the name which had been given to him during circumcision. I choose the mentioned name in memory of the grace of the Lord, which God bestowed on me in order to save me from many waters. And the second reason is that it was also the origin of the name Moses. Thereby, I followed the commandment of the king and did not violate the commandment of the Torah, which forbids to change the name. As you may know, one of the pillars of rabbinic teaching in Ashkenaz was the principle Dinah Dimalchutah Dinah, which required the observance of the respective state laws. Of course, observance was not always possible and led to moral conflicts, but in Wasserzug's example we see how divine and secular sphere could be reconciled. Sofer rejects the change of name, and also Wasserzug does not want that, but actually he did not change his name, which is Moses, but complemented it with a second name, which is Wasserzug. The urgent question after all these compromises and cooperation is whether we can find more traces of resistance. In fact, stories of resistance against forced derisive names are very prominent in the literature, and yes, we do, but on a verifiable level far away from what we would expect. In Prussian sources, I came across only one case of a complaint against an imposed name. The tailor Hirsch Moses from Krojanke lamented in 1813, "After the municipality asked me to adopt a family name, I chose the name Schneidemühl, and I had to pay in total 2 thaler and 18 groschen for the certificate of citizenship. I got the name Karman as a derisive name. If your majesty refuses this name, the municipality should inform me and I would choose another name. Hence, I ask your majesty to grant me the name Schneidemühl or Mooswald or Leipold. My children and me do not like the name Karman, and we ask to be spared from expenses since my profession is a tailor." The authorities granted his complaint and stated that, I quote, "a name cannot be imposed on anyone." Another case is that of butcher Levin Moses. According to the law, he was obliged to adopt the surname of his uncle, but this would have led into total chaos, contrary to the main goal of the law to create order. And I quote, "If I would adopt the name Levin as hereditary family name, and since my first name is Levin, I would have to call myself Levin Levin, but I do not want this." His final name was Levin Lesser. And another example of objection is Jakob Salomon Meyer. When the royal decree was declared that all Jewish coreligionists have to bear a fixed family and tribe name, I announced to the municipality of Krojanke that I choose the name Meyer. The municipality, however, decided that I was not allowed to adopt this name and named me Dannenberg. This is totally against my will, and I'm absolutely not indifferent about this since my name is familiar and trusted by my trade partners. These things are of utter importance to the merchant and hence I do not want to sacrifice them. Incidentally, the name Meyer is a genuine German word which does not need further evidence and etymological explanations. Here we see many of the aspects that I've already mentioned, the economic dimension and also the patriotic attitude. And although we know, and Meyer knew too, that Meyer is not only the common German name but derives also from the Hebrew name Meir. So maybe he played with the authorities, we don't know. However, the examples show that arbitrary acts happened, but also that objection and protest was possible. Compared to the common picture, we can confirm that these kinds of arbitrary acts are a rare exception, at least in German-speaking countries. On the contrary, several studies could prove that the officials involved did their job faithfully and or even totally indifferently. In a study on the Grand Duchy of Baden, Erwin Manuel Dreyfus could find only 3 cases in which Jews complained about their new name, or more precisely about the removal of their former names. All of them were persons with the name Levi, who had worn this name already prior to the laws. In other cases, we can see that new names were not really rejected, but simply did not find their way into everyday life. In Homburg, we know that many names did not appear in official documents even 30 years after the adoption, while Jews in Bayreuth used their old names 15 years later without interference by officials. And also in the case of Levin Lesser, we met him earlier, we see that he signed his Hebrew signature with Leiser Leib, which means that he still used different names in public and in private sphere. So I come to my conclusion. In my little overview, I could show that the adoption of permanent family names in German-speaking countries represented not simply an authoritarian means which Jews had to comply with. No, I hope I showed that the reaction of the first bearers to these names was as diverse as the variety of their newly created names. The state motivation of pushing or encouraging Jews towards emancipation by reduction of distinctive limitations on the one hand and educational measures on the other was debated internally by Jews and often perceived positively. But most of all, that this first generation already had an awareness of the importance of a public name. They reacted with multifaceted creativity and pride, with exuberant patriotism and religious self-confidence. While some enthusiastically cheered this policy, others even implemented surnames on their own, anticipating state laws and highlight that Jews had agency in this process. This proves that Jews did not simply assimilate because of state pressure, but also before or even against state laws. The new family name was more than just a modern gimmick, but a mercantile embodiment, a trademark for business partners, and an expression of public respectability. It was a projection surface for a desired identity, period. Furthermore, we see the social dimension of self-naming. The adoption of a permanent family name was an expression of an enhanced class consciousness, which was inevitable for economically successful Jews on their way into civil society. Ruth Kestenberg-Glattstein assumed that the adoption of family names promoted a leveling of Jewish society because even people of the lowest classes could bear a proud family name, like the richest brethren. But as we have seen, that was not the case everywhere. In Hamburg or Prussia, for example, the ones who could not afford the registration as citizens did not have the right to bear a family name. Accordingly, the absence of a family name could construct social difference towards poorer and more traditional classes. So, as I said in my introduction, the voices I presented today shed some light on the German lands, while I exclude the Habsburg Empire and especially Galicia. But yeah, this is a totally another topic, and yeah, I'm happy to talk another time about it. Thank you very much.
Questions, comments? Anybody? Well, I wanted to ask you about, this notion of agency, Jews, and, because you pointed out here, compliance, resistance, adaptation. I was thinking of the example of Moshe Wassertzug also while you were talking, because there he even gives it a kind of religious dimension, which is even better. Is that the act of adopting a family name is a way to express my Jewish faith and my faith in God, which is an interesting thing. And I wanted to ask, though, do family names begin to get a status within the Jewish community, for example, in writing a ketubot or a get?
I haven't checked that, but
Something to consider.
I consider that, but I would assume no, not in that time. Maybe later, but I mean, I would also like to consider gravestones. So Witold's research is very interesting for me. So I want to know also when exactly family names were included on gravestones. When did they find their way from a means of the administration into everyday life? So, and also into religious life. But I can't tell you right now.
Yes, please.
What was the sanction against person who refused or did not have surname? What were the consequences?
That's a good question. In theory, we find in the edicts that there's they have to pay an amount of money, but from my sources, I've never found anything like that. So, but let me think. I try to remember if there was a case or not, but. No, I think it's more a problem in theory, so that the officials feared that this could happen, but in reality it just didn't, because if you refused a name, you could either comply are not. This is maybe my assumption for Galicia. You simply didn't use it. You never used it. You only used it in the correspondence with the administration, for example. So it was of no importance in everyday life. But this is an assumption.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you for your very synthetic overview of the situation in Germany. I think that there is something you have to consider the difference of the years
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
reactions.
Yeah.
Also, not only the locations, but like the years. And you quoted this Levin who didn't want to be Levin.
Mhm.
It was in 1846.
No,
I saw the
that
citation.
one. I thought the other one's from Dreyfus.
Yeah. So, and in France, in Alsace, you have hundreds
Mhm.
of Moses, Abraham, etc. And it was not an issue
It was
for
what?
them in 1808.
Mhm.
So I think in the middle of the 19th century, mentalities have probably changed.
Yep.
And I wanted also to ask you about the application of the Napoleonic laws. But I guess since what you call occupation of in Germany, it didn't last. So probably the Napoleonic law couldn't apply. But in France, with the laws about the adoptions of names, which were not for assimilation, but only for military purpose, for the conscription of the soldiers, and also for fiscal taxation.
In the civil
Fiscal
statutes.
also. But with this law, it was said that in the religious rites, the rituals, you had to apply this. And when you were summoned to Torah,
Mhm.
you should
Yeah.
be named not by your Hebrew name, your holy names, sacred names,
Mhm.
but by your legal new names. And it was applied
Mhm.
at the beginning during the empire,
Mhm.
and after that, when Napoleon was not ruling the country, they abandoned the system. But I think it has a real impact, and so I wonder if it was the same in occupied Germany.
Well, let's say France is really extreme in this, how much influence it had into the religious sphere. So, as you said correctly, it was only allowed to be called up to the Torah by the legal name. The question is if this was really checked. If really police came to the synagogue and checked, oh well, is this really your name or not? But this law was really implemented in these Western German parts, and it was definitely implemented. So Jews in Western Germany adopted names in 1808, and you can see sometimes even kind of French patriotic currents in Jewish society, so that they choose very French first names or surnames. Although also there it's not, we can never tell if it's their own choice or the choice of maybe an official. And then you have to keep in mind that, then the French administration left. And the question is, what happened to the names? If Jews stuck to the names or not? Because in some areas there were no new name laws until, again, 1846, I think, when Prussian officials who rule the area now implemented a new law. And then you have to see whether the names that were created in 1808 were still used then or not. So Yeah.
We have room for further research. I think we're going to have to stop now. I'm sorry. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Our fourth and final speaker today is Malgorzata Sliz-Marciniec, and she's affiliated with the Pomeranian University in Słupsk and did a PhD at the Jagellonian University in Krakow, and today she's speaking about changing names of Jewish students at the Jagellonian University in Krakow in the second half of the 19th century. Please.
In the first, I want excuse for my bad English, and it's not good. Oh yeah. Thank you. Yes, okay. Changing names of Jewish students at the Jagellonian University in Krakow in the second half of the 19th century. It's given names of the Jewish inhabitants of Galicia became the object of interest for the Austrian authorities in the 18th century. The regulation that imposed the German surnames also included an obligation to use given names taken from that language, patent of 1787 and 1805. Further restrictions soon followed. The right to select the right to select a name was last officially limited to given names included in a specialist decree from 12 November 1787. Liberalization only came about in the 1834. At the time, the Jews were allowed to choose names from the calendar, except patrons of particular countries, or of course German name. The progressive circles tried to convince The progressive circles tried to convince the government to change this strict position. In 1860, the author, using the nom de plume of W.F., published an article in Ojczyzna, Motherland, where he or she demanded that the people who intend not to differ from the rest of their compatriots, even in terms of their name, be not hindered by the general government in this field, and being based on an act was also a factor in the ongoing assimilation and citizenship process. We don't not demand any exception or privilege for ourselves, but as citizens we have the right to demand facilitation on the road of progress and civilization, and not intentional barriers and restriction. The action, however, was now limited to press publication. A few years later, the Jewish religious community of Lvov, the biggest in the country, became involved in the matter. It tried to convince the government to issue a special ordinance that would make change of the current given name listed in vital records to modern one easy. These attempts failed. Therefore, it understandable that there were attempts at eventing the difficulties by making the change via facti. Via facti. This was facilitated by the low level of legacy senses among the public. One or another form of given name and its spelling was not serious problem for either the Jews or the rest of society. Unique evidence that makes observation of such informal extra-official changes of given names possible is provided by university archives. They deserve particular attention as they pertain to the future members of the country intellectual elites. Pedigrees and questionnaires that each of the students filled on own in each semester constitute an invaluable source of information. University employees left them much freedom and did not interfere with the information supplied by the student. And the moment the orientation in the vast amount of data is made easy by the Corpus Studiosorum Universitatii Jagiellonii. The phenomenon of change to the given name among the university students of Jewish origin was noted by Professor Mariusz Kulczykowski during the essential research of the Jewish students of the Jagellonian University, Żydzi studenci Uniwersytetu Jagiellońskiego w dobie autonomicznej Galicji. The Jagellonian University is one of the oldest universities in Central Europe. It was founded in 1564 and it is a junior only to the Prague University, established in 1548. The relationship between the university and the Catholic Church and the fact that theology dominated for centuries affected the selection of the students and excluded Jews from the group. The first students enrolled in the first years 19th century. The first now is Salomon Woll of Wolbrom. However, they did not become more numerous until the late 16th years of the 19th century. By the end of the 1980s, about 4,000 of them passed throughout the university, changed to give names, and in the diverse variants pertained to about a fifth of their total number, and nearly 3/4 of all the Jewish students of Jagiellonian University declared Polish nationality. Most such change aimed at adopting a given name or names that sounded Polish. The following giving name change strategy can be observed. One or two Polish names were adapted to a Jewish one, then the sequence was changed and the unwanted name was moved to the last position. Sometime later, it was put in brackets or conjunction. Vel, recte, alias, or vulgo were added, and finally the name was dropped. A Polish name was added in brackets, 2 or 1 Jewish names. Later on, it was moved to the front, and the Jewish names were eventually abandoned. Enrollment for the next semester of studies under a new name without using a transitional period. Polonization of the German name previously in use. Matriculation at university under new name. The entire process was not always smooth and easy. We can observe many situations where students return to their traditional name and so weiter. For example, brackets, alias, it is example for book of doctor's promotion. This may be illustrated by the case of Israel Seltzer or Zeltzer. He started his studies as Israel, then he used the form Israel, and since the first semester of the academic year 1886-87, he gave his name as Israel Yosef, and from the second semester of academic year 1887-80 on only as Yosef. His diploma, however, was issued to him under the name of Israel. His pedigrees. The first is Israel Yosef and the second is Yosef. And Israel Zeltzer, Book of Promotion. Another case was the Chaim Rapaport, an alumnus of the Faculty of Law, born in 1872 in Żydaczów as son of Israel, a merchant residing in Drohobycz. He declared Polish nationality. He graduated from the gymnasium in Stryj and went to study law in the universities in Vienna and Lvov. In Krakow, he completed the last 2 semesters of his studies and obtained a certificate of higher education. While in Krakow, he most used the name of Chaim, but he also was known as Joachim Rechte Chaim. In 1911, he applied to the decan office of the Faculty of Law for replacement of his previous name of Chaim with Joachim in university documents and issue of the certificate of higher education under this name. Without this procedure, the authorities of the University of Lvov did not want to issue a diploma that would state a name proper to the Polish language according to my nationality and corresponding to the actual state of affairs. Explained that due to the unawareness of the person managing vital records, and despite the intention of my parents, he had been registered in matrical books under the name of Chaim instead of Joachim. They explained to support his claims, he presented a certificate issued by the Jewish religious community at the urban authorities of Stryj. The officials of the Jagellonian University were not sympathetic to his request. They explained that such change can be made only after he had presented a relevant decision by the general government. And the second example, in 1884, 2 students bearing the identical names and surnames of Baruch Witlin, born in 1858 in Kamionka Strumiłowa, no information about their possibly blood relation, were much more fortunate. One of them received the diploma under the name of Bernard, and the case of the other, the name of Benedict, was added. People identifying themselves with Jewish nationality at times did not resist the temptation to have a modern name derived directly from the Polish calendar as well. The well-Polish Zionist politician Ignacy Schwarzbart may serve as example. He matriculated at the Jagellonian University under the name Isaac, but the doctoral diploma he received specified his name as Ignacy. Immatriculation book and the book of doctor's promotion and pedigrees. Isaac Ignacy. During his studies, he used both of those names in different arrangements and variations. As it has been mentioned, due to the prevalence of persons identifying themselves with being Polish among the Jagellonian University students of the Mosaic faith, in the vast majority of cases, names from the Polish language were assumed. The selection of modern given names is also an interesting point. Notably, it's very rare for a traditional Jewish name to be replaced by its actual counterpart from the Polish calendar, at times completely new, which bore relation to the former ones were adopted. The decisive criterion for selection is similar sound, the identical initial letter of the alphabet and the fact it was used by Christian majority. Rare or unusual names, even they were translation of Jewish ones, were used sporadically. This can be illustrated by the example for the name Fable, Phoebus. Only one example used this name. Therefore, Isaac most often become Ignacy, Israel, Isidor, Mojżesz, Maurycy. On the other hand, Hirsch has the equal chance to become Henrik or Herman. Baruch is Bernard, but also Benedict. Leip, it's Leon, but Leip became Leopold equal often. We can also notice cases where typical Polish name with Slavic origin was used. For example, Binem could become Bolesław. It's Binem Żmigrud, a medicine student from Tarnów, became Bolesław Żmigrud, diploma book. Due to absence of data, no analysis is available for people who enrolled to the university under modern names. It can only be estimated that about a third of people decide to obtain higher education diplomas with the desired modern Polish name. The efficiency of such effort was the result of the students' consistence, user the new name, consistency or the lack therefore of the administrative employees of the university, and finally the proverbial stroke of luck. Thank you for attention.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Yes, please.
I have a question. Thank you, all the speakers, for very interesting talks. I would like to ask, especially the Polish representatives. I am from Poland. Did you ever encounter a family name Morocco?
I don't remember.
Morocco, all of them from Dutch.
I don't remember it. In Krakow University study most students of Galicia. Jews from Polish kingdom is a small population. I think it's maybe one or two person from Lodz, but I don't remember this name. When you want, you can so in Corpus Studiosorum. It's all students in this part. You can so.
Yes, please.
Yes, very interesting how people actually played, and like in chess, you changed positions until it would drop out and maybe came back. The question is whether all those changes are reflected also in other documents which the people have. If they're state members of certain organization, whether all those changes are also reflected there. And more important, we have also a person from Yad Vashem. Some of the people from the age group, I think they may have perished in the Holocaust. And I think it's worthwhile to check under which name they are being remembered in Yad Vashem records, whether all those changes are reflected or just the university wants it that way, okay, let them have it, I'll continue
Yes.
my life as I understand.
Yes, that it's problem often it's problem with identification. Not often we have many information about this person, and I think this binem Żmigród, Bolesław Żmigród, used in Poland after 1918, Namen Bolesław, and work in Poznań. But I know about this person. Many person but it is a very interesting question. What they do.
Please.
Can you see an interesting pattern in terms of whether students choose German or Polish names?
In a big part, they choose Polish. They have Polish nationality and they want Polish name. Not in the second half in 19th century, Jagellonian University have Polish university. They use Polish language in lectures, on documents. If somebody was German, they study in Wien or Lemberg in Wów. And small groups declare from German, Czech nationality, Jewish nationality. It is surprise, but most prefer Polish name. Small group from German.
Some surnames could be both German and Polish, like Joseph or
Yes. Sometimes it's used. Phoebus Favour Salomon, the lawyer, use in Polish name Phoebus, and in German form use in this name sometimes in yes, sometimes use German and sometimes use Polish version of the same name.
Yes, please.
I just have an additional short answer. My great-grandfather was born as Chaim Shria Ackerman. Then he moved to Krakow. Krakow, he changed his name to Herman. And after 1918, he changed it again to Henrik. So he used the whole range of possibilities. And regarding the surname Morocco, there are a lot of graves with that surname in Warsaw Cemetery. I remember that because it's a nice surname. So I know there is and for Lodz there is a lot of resources and genealogical resources that were saved after that weren't burned during the Second World War. So there's a lot of chance
You are
might
looking
find something.
for the family, or you want to know why the name is Morocco?
No, it's my maiden name is Morocco.
Okay.
My father.
Yeah, but what do you want to know? You want to know the origin, or you want to?
I would like to know where it comes from. Nobody knows.
Nobody.
No,
It's the name of a country, but
Yeah, it's
not true that nobody
later
knows.
than family.
Have you checked the Alexander Geiger's dictionary? There's a dictionary
Dictionaries of surnames.
It comes from a profession.
I guess so.
Morocco is Moroccan. It's a kind of leather. It's how a special way to work the leather in order to be very smooth.
This is very interesting, and I've heard so far this explanation, this possibility. And as far as I know, the family in the last century, they were all textile. They were dealing with textiles.
not unusual.
It has nothing to do with Morocco.
Anyone else? Yes, please. I only have a couple minutes left.
But one can actually tie up what Alex just said and the cemeteries and the names of the cemeteries that Witold was talking about. Because if there was the name Geffen and there were other things that perhaps were the trades or that people took as
well. Surely there's some connection between what everybody said over here.
I have one question, if I might ask. What kind of parallels do we see, if at all, in the larger Jewish population? Not just among students. Have you tried to check that, see this pattern of changing the first name to a more Polish one?
It's hard to say. I don't. We have special sources, and it's not too easy. What we have the process. We have a person. He studied 4 or 5 years, and we so. And for many person, many population, Polish population, Jewish population, we didn't this same sources. And I think it's often it's a popular phenomenon in Galicia, but we didn't have sources.
Anyone else? Alex, please.
Speaking of Yad Vashem, from our sources, from let's say pages of testimony that are records by the families, in most cases that both names are registered because one was the official name. After university, the person would go into his professional life with the new name, and in the family, he was known by the other name. So most of the times you have both names. And Feivel is the Yiddish distortion of family. It's the same name. In fact, there's no change. It's only the official spelling, if you want. Or the official.
But we have to official sources, and we see in the changes in official sources, not private. It is special from these sources, university.
Anyone else? If not, I'd like to thank all of our participants for a wonderful session. I think we all learned a lot today, and there's food for thought and hopefully further research for all of you. So thank you very much.